Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring Up Bat. Today, man, we're going to have some real good conversations. We're going to talk about our doubts and what they are becomes our part of our design. So I'm just going to quickly go into, my friend Martin. He's an entrepreneur. He's a patent inventor. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I have an IP background, and he's a founder of 4 decades of experience. So I can't wait to talk about the companies he's created, the products, the teams, the foundations. But let's start saying, hi, how you doing, Martin?
Well, how you doing, Dave? It is a great place to be today. So I'm looking forward to our discussion.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming on, and I can't wait to get to know you a little bit better. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive in.
Well, I'm 63 years old, so I've been trying to figure myself out for a while, and been in business for 40 years. I got to tell you, my pedigree is not what most business people would find to be attractive, but as an entrepreneur, it's very attractive. See, average student, coming out of high school. Didn't go any further, got fired from my first job and started a business as a technical illustrator back in the 80s.
Mm.
And just found myself around and found my way around and just kept learning, kept growing, learning, and doing the things. And eventually I owned a little ad agency back in Milwaukee. That's where I'm from, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And at that time, 9/11 hit.
Mm.
And marketing and advertising day was discretionary. So all of my clients went away. I had 5 children at home.
Wow.
I had just moved into a new office, finally felt like I made it. And 9/11 hit and I lost everything. I actually wound up going bankrupt. I'll never forget the day that I had to peek out that damn window every day and see if that little Saturn lease was still there because I couldn't afford to pay for it anymore. And, that's true entrepreneurship, right? And one thing led to another. I eventually started an online company. And then that led to my last company, which was a manufacturing company. And by the way, just between you and I had no experience starting, founding, or owning a manufacturing company. But one thing I learned over the years is, you figure it out as you go, and I end up being an award winner for it. Not bad for a kid that came out of Waukesha, Wisconsin, and barely could handle himself reading sometimes. So, I that's where I'm at now. And by the way, I exited my last business, and for the last 4 years, I'm building new stuff. I have a cigar company. I started a
Mm.
cigar brand. I found that since I've been smoking cigars, my blood pressure has lowered, and I'm starting another business called Rocket Man Labs to help leaders become even better. And then I just wrote the book, and that's where that you are up to speed on who I am.
There you go. I mean, what a incredible story. I mean, what type of manufacturing company? I'm just curious.
Well, I created a product called Ozark River portable sinks. They were portable hot water hand washing stations used in compliance. Like I sold a lot in New York. A lot of Times Square chefs would need a hot water sink on the go. We could
Yep.
do that. I did classrooms, Costco, anyone that needed hand washing compliance. And I ended up designing a 40,000 square foot facility here in near the Nashville area.
Nice. Yeah, yeah. Nashville. I love Nashville. I've spoken on a couple of stages in Nashville. But so really just sounds like you just kept on pushing. So no matter what, I mean that's part of the story is the shifts that you've gone in life. I mean, again, didn't go to college, but you still found some opportunities and you keep looking for opportunities. Now, a lot of people as an entrepreneur, entrepreneurs will always keep pushing through, but the rest of those people, right, who don't, we sometimes live in our doubts. And you seem to recognize that doubt is not a weakness. Doubt is how do I then overcome it? And that's how I look at it. Also, is while I do doubt sometimes, I'm also looking for the opportunities to okay, what do I need to be educated in differently to then remove the doubt and make it more of a certainty.
Yeah, I think doubt is, when I wrote this book, When Doubt Becomes Design, I published it about 3 weeks ago. But I got to tell you, Dave, I started it 30 years ago. And what I did was I had 3 kids at the time, and I I was broken. I grew up in a traumatic home. I felt my brain was broken, my heart was broken. It would just show up in relationships. I was still an entrepreneur and I was pushing forward. It would show up in my personal relationships. And I remember one day I said, I'm just going to brain dump this stuff out here. And so I just decided to dump it all out on a computer one night when the kids went to bed. I ended up with 12 pages of, I guess, stories. And I put them in an envelope and I put them away. I never wrote them to share them.
Mm.
And and 2 years ago I moved and I couldn't find, I always had that envelope in my peripheral somewhere. And I thought I lost it. And I was digging through some boxes this was last year, and I found the yellow envelope. And it was the 12 original pages I printed off that old Epson printer. The kind that you would buy a new printer, then buy the new ink because the ink was more expensive than the printer.
Sure, yeah.
I grew up in a different era. And
Oh,
so I found that yellow envelope and I got myself a cup of coffee, sat down, and I decided to read it. And one thing I discovered, the big thing I discovered, was the man reading it was not the same man who wrote that.
mm.
And I saw a lot of doubt in that man that wrote it. And, after building 5 companies, selling them, you still have doubt. I don't think we label it as doubt. But actually, that's what I started with when I wrote the book. And I decided to write a book. And here I wrote the book and I finished it the first time. And I gave it to an architectural editor. And he said, Marty, it's the strangest thing. He said, the book looks like it's written from two different people. He didn't know anything. David was amazing. He said, yeah, the first 4 chapters look like they're written from a different person
Hmm.
than the rest of the book. And I shared with him that story. And it's interesting. The reason doubt became design became the title of the book. And I didn't decide that. It wrote itself. It's a memoir. It's a prescriptive memoir of all these times of insecurity or unstable circumstances, or being in somebody else's ecosystem without any kind of honor, glory, or power,
Hmm.
and realize you're at the whim of everybody else, which brings on doubt, right?
Yep.
And I'm not even so sure we label it like that. But I realized that throughout my life, whether it was going through trauma, and by the way, trauma to me as a kid was being hung out a 2-story window by my ankle because I didn't act right at the age of 4. I'm not talking about, like I didn't clean my room, so I got spanked. I'm talking about real stuff, right? And but anyway, the whole idea is that I realized in all these unstable situations that I always built a stronger foundation to get me to the next level.
Mm.
And that's when I realized that doubt wasn't really a feeling or to be holistically applied. Like it's like we play it holistically, but I've learned to use it specifically. Like doubt is not just a feeling of inadequacy, but it's really based on and anchored in some sort of situation or uncertainty. And so throughout an entrepreneur's life, or a father of 7 children, or a child that came out of abuse, there's lots of those opportunities to either fall through the crack, give up, or just fall apart.
Well, a lot of that, the doubt is because we don't have that vision yet, or the right amount of information, right? It's not just you're doubting, like tomorrow, is the sun going to rise? I don't doubt that. It will. Will I see it? That's a different thing, right? If it's cloudy, but it's going to rise. It's, those are the certainties, but it's also the fact that that'll happen. But if I said, well, this tomorrow when the sun rises, it's going to be purple, that becomes the uncertainty, and where it could come on the doubt, or at least somebody else's could doubt it. But that's, what makes that it becomes inbred in us. And I love that you said that the first part of your book had like a different voice. Because that's the trouble I'm in right now. I wrote a series of medieval times type book. I started writing it 20 years ago. And in today's voice, there's words that I would say differently, or I would do it. Even though it's fiction, I'm having the challenge in how do I get today's voice, who I am today, with the same story that without rewriting a whole book. And that's it's been interesting. And actually, it's also led me. I originally just had one book in my mind, and now it's turned into a several book, you know, saga.
Look what it turned into.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was like. I was like, okay, it's where you found it. I'm sure you know it is that old quote. When's the best time to grow a tree? 20 years ago. When's the next best time? Start today. And that's really where it is. Is I already have the tree because I planted those seeds 20 years ago, and I hadn't looked at the tree going forward. But now that I've looked at it, and got to prune it. You got to take care of it a little bit differently. Now, as you've had created a lot of companies, what makes a meaningful, culture, right? Culture to me
Mm.
is almost everything. You can find the right product, but if you don't have the right culture, it also, like you were saying about the doubt, it also permeates in everything we do if you're not in the right culture.
I think it's just as confusing sometimes to understand where doubt begins and where it ends. It's like culture. Here's what I've always believed in is that culture will eat strategy for lunch any day. It's the difference between success and ultra success. Because if your team is not behind you, nobody will be behind you. And so here's the big question is whether the culture that we have in our business is accidental or intentional.
Mm,
And like there's nothing wrong with being a driving force kind of culture as long as you're hiring driving force kind of people. And so sometimes we just accidentally, and by the way, you are always going to have a culture in your business. It's very
right.
fascinating that you speak on culture today because that is a hot button for me. I love building great cultures. That's what I do really well. And so the idea is that we want to build an intentional culture. And I think it all starts, Dave, with the value system. When our foundation isn't like, hey, how do we hire great people? I would say, what's your foundation? Who are you?
Hmm.
Because people talk core values. We got all the buzzwords, core values, value systems, yada yada. And I agree with every one of them. But if we look at the word core value, it's your core, right? It's who you are. It's not the mistake. I think sometimes, Dave, is we're trying to look back who we used to be, or we're looking forward to who we want to be. But who you are, it needs to be recognized and understood. And if you want to change your culture, that is an intentional action.
Yep.
I, I do have a question for you since you're asking me lots of questions.
Sure. No
How,
problem.
how long does it take to change a culture in a business?
Well, it depends on well, some buy-in, but it also depends on do you have a vision, right? You could change culture in a minute, a second, right? All you have to do is walk in, and depending on what you say, so it's a lot of it's presence, a lot of it's turned around on, and what are you saying, right? If I tell you you have to wear, impose my will as a leader, I'm changing the culture.
Mm,
Same thing is when we're explaining things, right? When you communicate or educate the population or the work environment, the teams, they work out a lot better. Because they at least understand it. They don't have to like everything, so it still could be a based on what you're doing, a different culture, but it definitely has to be the communication, is one of the things that lead to it. Because and that's why I love these type of these scenarios where we get to have those questions. And so I'm going to turn it back to you. So, boom, back to you. Is even when you say the right thing, that doesn't always change the culture.
No, cultures have to be intentional.
Mhm.
And I egged you on a little bit with that one, but the reality, it takes about, let's say, just take an average of a year to change a culture. Because people think it's one big thing. I would say one of the largest misperceptions is that we want to do things with the team. So on Tuesday, we have drink night. On Thursday, we have bowling night. And we say, well, that's a good culture. Those are social activities. What we have to do is it's all the little things that we do to build a new culture. If you want a culture of award and reward, you have to know where you're coming from to reward them or award them.
Hmm.
One of my core values was own it. It's one thing that I've always believed in it. Just own it. Whatever you do, just own it. You say something stupid, own it. Say something smart, you can own that. You can, you're allowed to own that too, right? And so the point I was trying to make is that somebody said, well, how do you measure that? Well, you walk into a place and you can feel it. I said, no, well, how do you measure culture? And I found out that measuring culture came this for me was that the day that I had to fire somebody because they didn't match the culture anymore, because they weren't doing the things that we needed them to do, and they didn't want to go, was the day that I understood that I built a very good culture,
Sure.
even though they didn't fit. And it was a grown man. He was crying. I felt really bad for him, but he'd not show up on Monday and Friday, or he just didn't fit the culture.
Right. And it's one of the things, not everybody fits a culture because, again, not everybody does the same thing. There has to be everybody has their own blueprint, right? Their authenticity. When I talk about authenticity, and
Yes.
and not everybody likes it. So, in a culture, so even your example of where we go out for beers one night and bowling, well, that could be great, right? You're looking at it from the outside, but for people who might have children and then have to get babysitting and things like that, or the pressure that comes, there's a resentment, right? So understanding that, hey, Martin, I know Tuesdays and Thursdays we go out as a team, but I understand you're going through different sort of challenges. You have a wife, you're just married, you're on your honeymoon. I get it. Don't worry about it. If you don't show up, it's okay. You're not being penalized for that. And you have to have those conversations also as part of the culture. It's that communication and openness that allows the culture to thrive in versus saying, well, you missed this thing and you missed this, and starting to kind of, it's still the same culture we're talking about, but it's how it's applied and the intentions we put behind it, as you had mentioned.
Yeah, we have an empathetic culture that fits perfectly. And we should have empathy in our culture. I really feel like once we really understand who we are and all the things that we can do, once we establish who we are, then we can hire according to who we are.
Mhm.
Not that we match our personalities. That's not what that means, but those core values. If you don't like lying, don't hire anybody that has a history of lying. I'm just making something
Yep.
simple. But what I realized, Dave, this is very interesting. I realized that I can't replace another person's value system. So if I hire somebody that doesn't share my value system, the moment that I try to replace a person's value system, they end up having no foundation,
Mm.
right? So you have to intentionally understand who you are, who matches you, and don't be ashamed of it. There's nothing wrong with it, unless you're some sort of jackwagon, I guess. But most of the times, it's just who you are. Hey, we're a lax culture and we get along with everybody. Fine, and you have to hire lax people that love to get along with everybody.
Right.
You know, So, but I really found that you can't replace another person's culture system. What you want to do is match them.
Mm. Yeah, no, right, because you have to figure out and match, and it's good about having all the different types of personalities. I know, because everybody, you can't have everybody. They might have to row in the same direction, but you can't have everybody the same type of personality because everybody has their strengths and what they like. Now, I know you have your four factors of instability, and how do they show up in life? Let's dive into that a little bit.
Sure, I'll just name them quick. Number one is an instability, by the way. is the source, doubt is the signal.
Mm,
So you're not broken because you doubt or it's not a weakness. It's the instability or the uncertain situation that has happened that needs to be solved. So there's four of those types, and one is pending decisions. That's somebody who needs to make a decision but hasn't made the call yet. I'll buzz through this, and if you want to dive in one of these, that's fine. Number two is unresolved tension. That's when you walk into a room and you can feel that edge, or that vibe changes because there's a certain person, or maybe there's a subject that comes up that everybody gets quiet. It's that unresolved tension. That situation brings doubt because their doubt is doing some heavy lifting. That something here needs to be faced. Number three is perceived instability. That is kind of where imposter syndrome falls in. And it has a great cousin, a kissing cousin called comparison, right?
yep.
And that happens when things feel uneasy before we know the facts. So the perception or the assumption, right? And we base ourselves on that. And that's where doubt is signaling us to slow down, check the facts, stop letting fear or self-perception write that narrative, then make a plan forward. And number four is uncertain outcomes. That's when a situation demands action, but you don't know how it ends. And that shows up every day. Like you send a proposal, you send out a resume, but the party has not responded. You got that doubt gap in there, right? The situation is that you put something out. The doubt is formed by not knowing what's going to happen. But then how we can control that is that we know that we can't control the outcome, but doubt we know gives that uneasy feeling, that doubt, that signal for us to take action. Maybe we make a follow-up call, right? Then there's the action part. That's how we combat that. Maybe we trust our work a little bit more. Maybe we trust that the effort we put in was good enough. And then what we have to do at the end of that one is that learn to build from the outcome, no matter what it is, because we have to, that's the only way we can get forward. That's the only way we can get forward.
Well, yeah, and you have to build from where you're at. I mean, as you just mentioned, but it's not so easy, right? So, again, you said, bankrupt. So, how do you build from something that didn't go the way that was supposed to go?
I think number one, I'll tell you what, there's four factors of using doubt as that
Mhm.
signal. So how I made it through the bankruptcy was number one, is I had to trust myself. I trust that the market, it wasn't something I did, it was really more of the market. And anything I did, I could move past it. So number one, I had to trust yourself. I don't think people trust themselves. They don't trust that feeling they get. They don't trust that intuition or doubt they have. How about we just trust the facts in front of us? Um, I think it's really important. So that's how we start getting through it. And what I look for is when I start moving forward, Dave, I start looking for confirmation.
Mm.
I don't look for affirmation. Once I have my mindset and I feel that gut feeling, we're looking for those signs sometimes. So instead of being affirmed, I look for being confirmed.
Right. This confirmation is so much more. Well, each has a place, but an affirmation is, "Hey, I know I'm going to do this." Right. You're thinking positively, but you still might not be able to see it. Confirmation is really important because you can see it. You could see whatever you could be confirmed wrong. Based on it, but then have the choice to make the decision because you had more information. Always goes back to communication and more information, but that confirmation actually kills doubts much quicker because you don't have to then just hope. Again, when I always talk to people about hope, I go, hope is wonderful, but if you have no plan, it's then a wish, and that's something we do when we go to bed. So we need to have a plan to do that. And it won't always go right, as you mentioned, because one, we learn a lot from from our failures, and I think that's one of the things that successful people don't have worries about talking about failures, right? Tony Robbins, you name it, Steve Jobs, um, Bill Gates. They weren't all successful out out the door. I mean, Elon Musk, talks about some of his failures. You know, but they all knew, they all had the belief that whatever mistakes they had, they took that as a learning opportunity.
Yeah, they didn't get into doubt and start backfilling more doubt,
Right.
right? They began to trust themselves, made some actions, got confirmation. Then what they do is they recognize that signal of doubt, understanding that it is something to solve.
Hmm.
It is not something to wallow in. It's not something to bathe in. It's not something to stand in. It's like, what do we say? Paralysis by analysis, right?
Yep.
And then once we recognize where we're at, then we have to plan to expand. So we have to expand beyond that current situation.
Yep.
Either we talk about it with trusted peers. I think people don't write enough things down. They type things out, but there's something with the brain that when you write things down, it helps. Make a
100%.
list, right? You plan to expand. And then I would say this is the number one thing that hangs up people, leaders, and businesses is that they talk a lot, but they fail to execute.
Mm.
So we can sit at the bar and we can talk to the bartender about all of our woes and everything else, and that's fine. But get the hell up and get moving, right? So find something you can execute and something that you can move forward on. And whatever the situation calls for, maybe it's a follow-up, maybe it's to execute the plan that you just had, but it's to move on or to move forward. And David, if I could say this, is that people have to stop beating themselves up. We're kind of stuck in this therapy culture right now where everything has to have a problem, where everything has to be a psychosis. Like imposter syndrome isn't even diagnosable. It doesn't say it's not real. It doesn't say that we don't work in it, but
Right.
not everything falls in that category, and not everything has to be solved in a intellectual standpoint. But what we need to do is work with that emotional, but then turn it into a logical place to move forward. But to stop beating ourselves up because doubt shows up, because I think if we remember that it's the situation that's broken and we're not the ones that are broken.
Right. Yeah, that's why I don't like using the word broken. I'm just like, okay, so we just have to figure it out. Sometimes, and when something breaks, it's okay. You can repair it, and that's what it is. That's what they have glue and duct tape for. And learning how to do that, move through those things. I think that's really when you're turning again the uncertainty into getting more information on how to do it. Right. Thomas Edison, right, failed a thousand times, 999 times to get the light bulb, and it's that one time, right? When you're looking for your keys, you always find it at the last place.
He would doubt the outcome, but he wouldn't doubt the ability to move forward.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
So his doubt was overcome by action.
Right.
You know, David Carnegie, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Uh-huh.
Dale Carnegie, had a quote, and it was, inaction breeds doubt and fear. Action breeds confidence and courage.
Sure.
And that is the truth. And that was another guy that got up and did it, didn't he?
For sure, yeah. And that's why we just have to keep moving forward. You can sit, you can kind of be upset a little bit. I mean, that's where, a little bit toxic in the old, rub it all, put some dirt on it, you get hurt playing ball and things like that, or walk it off. But it's moving the energy because as you start walking, but there's also the idea of when it doesn't work out because it's turning that doubt into the design. I think somebody wrote a book like that. So but that's really what it is. And I shared with you before. One of the things that I've used for years is if you're going to doubt something, why don't you doubt your doubts? Because how many times have
Yes.
you thought of things that you're like, oh my God, this is going to happen. I know this is going to happen. I know it's going to happen. And then hey, Dave, well, how'd that thing go? Oh, it didn't happen like I thought it was going to happen. So you doubt your doubts. We have so many things that we're willing to give away our powers and things like that. Think about that when things start working. Because the universe really does work for our favor, and you got to meet it halfway. You got to do the work. You can't just show up and say, "Hey, I want to manifest." Again, the affirmations. You have to actually take some of that action to do some of the things.
Right. You
I-
can't just sit waiting for the door to open, right? There's a lot of leaders and there's a lot, especially entrepreneurs, that seem to be, and I see this in the C-suite as well. They are afraid to ask a question. And I hired somebody there was a purchasing agent, and she was really good. She came from a big place. She was taking a down
Yep.
payment or a lower pay to be with the company because she liked our culture. She liked what we presented her. And I found out that, like she sat there, she never asked any questions.
Mm,
And, that was my number one thing is that don't assume, ask the question. I found that smart people ask questions, right? And she sat there in her desk for like 2 weeks, and I looked at my operations manager and said, Bob, what's up with Christy or whatever her name was? And I realized at that moment, after I thought about and talked to her, that the reason she didn't ask any questions is because she was hired to be the smartest person in that room.
mm,
And so many founders find themselves like, I got to be the smartest person in the room. I can't ask anybody questions. But people ask me, what's the best thing that you've ever done in your business life?
mhm.
After 40 years, there's a lot of mistakes and there's a lot of this, but here's some genius. Where are we? I always wonder where genius sticks in, right? We even Bob said, we're always talking about, hey, we work by hard knots, and like we do learn by experimentation, right? And whether they're right or wrong. But one thing I realized is I didn't need to be or want to be the smartest person in every room.
Correct. Yeah.
And so therefore I hired intentionally smarter people than me to tell me how to run that area or that part of the business. And you know what happened? I got to tell you what happened. I also then became smarter because we are the average of the 5 people we hang out with,
Hmm.
right? We're also as smart as the questions we ask.
100%.
So I found that was a really interesting takeaway of running businesses. And once I realized that, I went to them. I didn't wait for them to come to me. I went to them and said, hey, whatever you need. Well, I try to encourage the questions, right?
Hmm.
And that was part of also then the hiring process. But it's very interesting. If you want to overcome doubt, ask somebody a question that you don't know. And guess what? You may not have that doubt any longer.
Well, that's how you get more information. And, I come from a background in legal. I'm not a lawyer, but, and I remember working with people and they're like, yeah, you only ask the questions you know the answer to. You need to have the facts. I'm like,
Mm.
no. What happens when there's a gray area? You want to, put that in there. I mean, like that's why I love podcasting, is I get to ask the questions. And sometimes, and I love when somebody goes, that was a good question. I've never been asked. I've been interviewed hundreds of times, never been asked that. I'm like, great. And I did my job because, it's one, then we both learned something else, or we reminded each other of something that comes at it differently. And that's how we learn. One of the I doubt that I'm one of the smartest people that walk in a room. I know I'm smart, so I don't doubt that I have intellect and things like that. But I love when I walk into a room that I'm able to be quiet until I'm comfortable enough to then ask the right questions, because that's where I know I just see things differently. That's why I love being a fly on the wall, because how I see things, others see it also. I mean, again, even with the name, the Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat, and even with on the logo, it says Uncle Dave. Both of those are points that people suggested. Oh, don't do that. They're gonna think you're violent. And I'm like, anybody who knows me, I'm not violent. I've lost more fights than I've won, and all that stuff. And the Uncle Dave, because a lot of people have the not trust. They had the experience about it, uncles and things like that. I go, but then that's also doing a disservice, and that's where our doubts are sometimes do a disservice for our growth, and or even not acknowledging some of the failures that we had. Right, a failure is not permanent until you make it permanent.
I believe that 100%.
Yeah,
One note on coaches, because that's another way to get over doubt, right? You get a good coach,
sure.
and a good coach doesn't tell you the answers. A good coach encourages you to go get the answer or come to the conclusion. Because I do believe that we're all sovereign, and I also believe that every man, woman, and child has their own answers within them. It just, we have to ask the right question.
Sure.
And I had a good business coach, but he'd poke me in my stomach and he'd say, Martin, you could use to lose a little weight. And I said, okay. I said, I did not hire you to get me in shape.
Right.
I hired you to get my business in shape. So I could tell that I had the wrong coach because I could tell that my doubt increased.
Hmm.
Clarity did not increase, doubt increased, right? And then I had hired another coach a couple of years later, and what a different coach. And he asked me this question. He told me this. He says, Martin, he said, I want you to read more. I said, well, I read a lot. And he said, I want you to read a whole book, front to cover. I said, I don't care what book it is. I don't care how long it takes you. I just want you to read a book. That's just what he wanted me to do. I called him a week later. His name was Chip. I said, Chip, I'm ready to read my book. What book do you want me to read? Over the phone, he says, what do you want to become? I said, I was like, I have no idea. I said, I'll get back to you in 2 days, man. I have no idea. But it was funny that I took those 2 days and I did think about the type of leader that I wanted to become. And what it was, I said, I want to be able to be a better listener.
Mm.
And he gave me John Maxwell. He recommended a book, and it was John Maxwell's Good Leaders Ask Great Questions.
Yep.
And if you want to eliminate doubt in your life, get somebody that you can trust around you, somebody that you can help work through those things. But at the end of the day, you still have to make a decision based on that situation that doubt has yelled at you about.
100%, because that's one of the things that I share with people. I go, if you don't make a decision, you've already made a decision. So, having a non-decision, which decision can you live with? And that's the challenge, and that's where at times I've been like, okay, I'm willing to live with the decision or the lack of decision and knowing the repercussions. I mean, again, again with my health, uh, I knew Big Macs and late nights, ice cream and all that stuff. Yeah, not so good. I made that decision, and guess what? It eventually came back to bite me for it, and now I have to make different decisions, or I get to make different decisions. Is how I'll talk about it, because I've now structured. Because we need to have that plan. We create the right plan, because when we structure things, it's not, we're learning from experience, not just starting over from scratch.
Right. It's interesting uh, that we talk about doubt, like everybody experiences it in some fashion. I bet you if you're in a room and we said, okay, who's ever doubted themselves? 100% are going to, the honest people, the honest 100 will raise their hand, right? Because there was a study by, it's called Korn Ferry Consulting. They found that 71% of all CEOs experience imposter syndrome, which is really the number one thing in doubt.
Right.
And it just doesn't just stop at the top, but the more you're doing, it probably just gets a little louder, right?
Sure.
So I think today that we've had a good shot of debunking kind of that myth that, doubt is just doubt and you got to wallow in it, but that you can really solve the situation that's causing it. Because I really do believe, Dave, that we've given this way too much power in our lives. You know,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
But a
because
lot of that is because of the not realizing how it was taught to us, right? A lot of the doubt. I mean, protecting. I know in my situation, my mother overprotected me, right? So I didn't get to skin my knee as much as I should have. Well, I did, but that's a different story. Um, but it's those things, and then in your situation when you shared, your knee was skinned, in a different way to you needed some more surety. You needed some grounding in a way, and some safety versus, you know, taking those chances. For you, a chance was like, all right, it was completely different. What? Yeah, so as you started learning some things, what failure that you received actually changed you the most?
hmm, I'm kind of a funny guy when it comes down to failure bit because I've been kind of skewed to understand that most of everything I go through is for success, right? And I would tell you this is that, that the failure to think that you can control another person's actions leads to the detriment of insecurity. And when my mom came in one day with a gun to her head and said she was going to shoot herself, I felt I failed her as a son.
Mm,
She never shot herself, but I lived with that. And I went through a lot of different things. And Dave, I tell you, the thing that switched it for me was the day that I got sick of that condition. The day that I got tired of being in, and I was 14 years old, and I got tired of it. And I remember going down to the basement, found an old cherry desk. I ended up putting it in my closet. I finally had my own room after, I was in 10 kids. I was number 9 of 10, and most of them were gone, and I got my own room finally. And I remember sticking this cherry, pushing all the clothes on one side, putting that cherry desk in there. I found a little lamp and stuck the lamp on there, took a little extension cord, went outside, plugged it in, closed the door, made sure there was no light showing so I felt like I was safe, right?
hmm
And I remember, what I focused on of all things, I focused on art. I went down to the Herbst Pharmacy area down there and I bought myself a little paint by number. And I used to draw and paint anyway. What it did it for me, it gave me structure. Number 17 blue goes number 17 blue in the sky.
Yeah.
Number 3 brown goes next to that rock. And pretty soon the picture was different. And what it did was it gave me structure.
Mm.
I ended up focusing on my art. I didn't stay in the damn closet for that long. I just want to tell you that. But I stayed in there long enough
But-
to really hone in my art skills. And by the time I got to high school, I was really good. I was actually accepted at one of the top art schools in the nation. I didn't go because I was such a mess. But what I did was all that uncertainty, that was the switching point. That was the day that I realized that I became a builder,
mm,
that I built from doubt to stability. I built from chaos to stability. I built from anything that was uncertain to certainty
mm.
because I couldn't control the uncertain part, but I could control the structure of the certain part. And that's really what the book is about, is really those kind of situations. It's full of those kind of stories. The exact same thing that you're asking about, I hope.
Yeah, no, no. It is exactly, and that's the structure is what takes us out of the doubt because getting us more information, and then the intention. So even with your story you just shared about the desk, and you made the intention to do something different. You didn't just sit there in your room worrying about it. You took what you needed to do to move that energy. Couldn't have felt good at 14 or any other age, but you were then able to use it to your advantage to build up skills and kind of make the world a little more beautiful with adding some color to it as well.
It changed my life. It really did change. Art saved me. And I think that people need to find something that's, feels like it saves them, but it can't be a person.
Mm, right.
It has to be something that you can dive into, a passion, something that you love. I always tell people, if you ever want to get out of yourself, go volunteer.
100%. I talk about that all the time. And, one of my mentors over the years, I was lucky enough to meet Frank Shankowitz, who is the gentleman who you probably know. He comes from around, he originally started around your area. In, he used to say he created the Make-A-Wish Foundation. So he was like, you just got to show up. He goes, well, there's always somebody who needs help. And, don't do it for credit. Do it because you want to show up, and everybody could be a hero. You've definitely been a hero this episode, and we're getting close to the end of the episode. I'd like you to walk into my magic garden, and what we do is we plant one more seed. You've given us a lot of information, a lot of great things that are going to grow in my mind as I listen to the episode again. Do you have one more piece of advice or a seed that you'd love to plant today?
Well, my favorite quote in the whole world, and I don't know even who said it, but it's stuck in my heart, was on the day of victory, no one is tired.
Mm,
And it's like if you can look at each day as a victory, you don't go to bed. You might be tired from
The
doing your
work, right?
bit, yeah, but you're not mentally exhausted.
I
And I really take that to heart. So just remember to count your wins.
Mhm.
We used to have a thing called, like Humble Brag Friday.
Mm.
And that was I'd gather the team, I'd shut all the phones off at 2 o'clock, and I'd get out these little cheesy plastic champagne glasses. And I had a bottle of sparkling wine and a bottle of sparkling grape juice, depending what side of the tracks you grew up on. And so we'd pour it, share it, and then everybody had to say at least one thing,
Mm.
Dave, that they did good and well that week. Because we spend our whole weeks firefighting. We spend our whole weeks putting out fires. We
Mm.
spend our whole weeks solving somebody else's problem. And but in all of that, we've done a good job. Even though it feels negative, we've done our job. And so I'd go around the table and I'd say, count your wins. So, two, on the day of victory, no one's tired. And how you do that is count your wins once a day or at least once a week as a humble brag and feel good about yourself and what you've done.
That sounds awesome. And we should always reward ourselves by acknowledging what we did, even internally, right? Sit down. That's why in the morning and at night, part of my personal practice is my gratitudes. Even when the day
Mm,
didn't go well, I go, okay, what can I learn from that? And and still thank you for getting me through the day. So day didn't go well, I still got through it, and sometimes that's the win that I needed.
yes. I've enjoyed myself. I really appreciate the conversation and I hope that we imparted something in somebody that that can take forward in life. And you've been an amazing, gracious host.
Well, thank you so much. How can everybody find you? So we want them to find the book as well as finding yourself.
I'd love you to read the book because
Awesome.
truly, anybody is because my desire for the reader is to see themselves on the pages. And I want people to see that they're not alone and they too can be intentional builders in their own life. And that book, when Doubt Becomes Design, you can find at Martin J. Watts, WATTS.com. So it's martinjwatts.com. You'll find the book, find a little bit of why I wrote the book, what I did. And then if anything, just drop me a line and say hello and tell me what inspires you and what empowers you to do better every day.
All right. Well, that sounds awesome, and I know I'd like to stay connected with you, and come on anytime you want. I'd love to. Are you writing any more books?
I do. I got another one project coming up.
Nice. Can't wait to hear about it.
It should be interesting. It should be another wild ride, I think.
All right. Well, looking forward to it, and I will pick up your book and read it, and then we'll have some more conversations around that.
Thanks, Dave. You have a great day, and I really enjoyed my time with you.
Thank you so much. And hopefully everybody else will enjoy our time with Martin and learn something. And I know I've learned a lot of things. Why I love doing this. And I just want to make sure that you bring peace and love in your life, what that means to you as your foundation, because from there we can grow and build on. And when you bring a bat, hit your sweet spot, because that'll help you knock it out of the park. Thanks so much.